Hello musicians, in this video I'm going to be teaching an in-depth lesson on Matteo Carcassi's Siciliano. This piece is a grade 2 piece, but we're going to be teaching a few more advanced concepts. The music for this piece is freely available to download as part of Easy Classical Guitar Volume 1. It's available in notation and tab underneath this video. And this will give you a good example of how I teach repertoire throughout the CGC Academy, which you're very welcome to join. It's a wonderful group of passionate musicians from all over the world studying classical guitar online. Let's get started. This is a really beautiful and very accessible piece by Matteo Carcassi, the Siciliano. A Siciliano is a rustic and graceful dance in 6/8. So we have a very approachable and elegant piece. We have open strings for basses for the most part, and we have a very clear melody with this repeated rhythm. So why is it a grade 3? This really could be a grade 2. Yes, I agree. But we're going to look at this in a bit more detail and ask for a few more challenging techniques, which elevates this piece to a grade 3. Those techniques are going to be the grace note, the slurs involved in that. There's also some bass stopping and controlling the resonance. Because we've got all of these open strings, it's good to control them, to stop them ringing, to make the sound a little cleaner. And in the second half of the piece, we actually delve into the B section that utilizes a lot of guide fingers. And so all of those requests really bring us up to a grade 3 piece. Let's have a brief overview of the piece just to get our bearings. So it's in ternary form. We've got 3 parts. We start in A minor at the beginning with this Anacrusis, which we'll talk about later. We continue on with this dotted rhythm that permeates the entire first A section. We briefly visit the key of C major down here. Then we return, do a left turn back into A minor with that E major chord. And we finish out the A section in A minor. Then we do a key change that's a little less common, and that is going to the parallel major. So here we have 3 sharps, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and that is the key signature of A major. So we've got A minor to A major, the parallel major. You may have already heard this key change in a very famous piece, Lagrima by Francisco Tárrega. And in this section, as I mentioned, we have guide fingers because we've got all of these featured thirds. Which is a lovely sonority. We'll also point out some sixths and tenths that happen in this piece. But we also have contrast in the difference of the rhythm. It's still long, short, long, but we no longer have the dotted 16th notes or dotted 8th notes. Rather, it's quarter note. We then go to the end of that section, DC al fine. For a reminder, this means dal capo, to the head. Capo is head. And then to the fino. So we go all the way back to the beginning. And then we go all the way back through the A section and finally finish here at fine. So we have our ternary piece that goes from A minor with a little bit of an excursion to C major, then to A major and back to A minor. Now, what makes this piece tick? The first thing I think that's probably good to address, and perhaps if we were studying anything in particular, it might be that dotted rhythm. So the dotted rhythm can be simply worked on with subdivision. Subdivision is where you take the shortest duration, in this case a 16th note, and use that as your metronome marking to fill in the gaps of any longer notes. So for example, this note here, let me zoom in. Can I zoom in? You gonna let me do this? There we go. This note here is a dotted eighth note, and we could fit 3 16th notes into that dotted eighth note. Then we have a 16th note, and then we have an eighth note, so we could fit 2 in there. So we're creating a group of 6 16th notes. That means if you set your metronome to 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6, then you have the underpinning rhythmic grid with which we can plot these notes. 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. Now it might seem simple, but we're really trying to tune this rhythm so it's very exact. And once we've worked on it and workshopped it in this piece, then all of your other pieces with the same rhythm will be steady. But it's important, therefore, to get it exact and correct in this piece. So I would use the metronome going da 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 da. Or you could use your voice, just like I did, making either some sort of sound da da da, or counting 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. Some people find that really hard to do. So a third option is to actually repeat the notes, creating your own subdivision. So you'd play C, 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 3 Cs, then 1 B, then 2 As. So you're filling in the gaps. That one people find the most challenging. But if you can do it, then you can play the whole piece like this. And it's a really useful skill if you can do it. If you can't, don't worry, you're not alone. A lot of people find that one a bit confusing. So either use the metronome on 16th notes, count out loud and play along with that, or you can write in or play in the subdivisions, which also works. Another rhythmic component that's very important throughout the entire piece is this anacrusis. This anacrusis, or upbeat as it might be referred to in pop music and other styles, links over the bar line into the next measure and gives a and one feel. You know, the Siciliano has this kind of rocking. We have 2 big beats on the 1 and the 4. 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. And when we have the anacrusis come in, it goes and 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 and 1. And so we kind of lean in to that downbeat, giving it a bit more weight. And it's important to mark where these come up. There's one right at the beginning. Here's another anacrusis. There's another anacrusis. Here are some in the middle of a phrase. And there's another one. And there's more on the next page as well. Have a listen as I play through this first page, how those anacrusis moments sound when I link through to the next beat. 1 2 3 4 5. So you get this real feeling of like preparing, almost like you're preparing to jump. And 1, da-dum, bum, ba-dum. So they also give you a really good indication of where the phrasing lies. So the phrasing here is very intuitive, I would argue. You know, then the anacrusis marks the beginning of the next phrase. Then beginning of the next phrase, some small ones there. So you can really see how the anacrusis will help you to play with that phrasing in mind. Now, just so we don't leave the second page out in the cold, you can see that the B section almost takes this idea of the Anacrusis and expands upon it and makes it a feature of this section. Here it is. Back to the beginning. And one final thing, just as a reminder, when you have an Anacrusis, you're going to find some measures that look incomplete. So for example, here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beats. Where's the sixth in 6/8? Well, it's over here. It's completed here. Same goes for this final measure. The completing missing beat is right back at the beginning because that initial upbeat needs to be added in to make this a full measure of 6. If that makes sense. All right. Now let's start looking at some of those details. So the first element that takes a little bit of finesse here is this grace note, known as an acciaccatura as opposed to an appoggiatura, which is a leaning note, a bit of a longer note. This is a quick grace note that doesn't disrupt the rhythm. And what I mean by that is that this E should still fall on the beat. Now you might wonder, well, does that mean that I have to play the grace note and then the bass A comes afterwards? Well, no. In guitar, that would be too fiddly. That's technical speak. That would be too much... you basically don't have to do that. So you will play the bass note at the same time that you play the F. And yes, that means that the bass note might come a tad before the beat, or you could argue that the E comes a little after the beat, but the bass note is played with the F. But what I highly suggest is to play the passage without the acciaccatura, without the grace note. That will teach you where the beat lies. And 1. And then you fit in the ornament, this grace note, so that the E still lands on the beat, as opposed to this, where that's pushing it late. You're making that note come late. So almost as a rule, I would say with any ornament, trills, mordents, grace notes, appoggiaturas, play the music without the ornament first to get oriented with where the melody lies rhythmically, and then add it back in. After all, it is an ornament. It's not the feature. It's not the melody. So the melody has the primary focus, the primary importance, and then the grace note literally ornaments that note. In terms of the mechanics of the slur, we're going from an F to an open E, and really just think about this index finger here, your first finger, plucking, and it just needs to be light and quick. I think out of all the slurs you might be doing on the guitar, 4, 3, 1, it's pretty easy. So the goal here is to make it elegant and not too much of a feature, not thwacking the second note or not holding on to it, just light. Again, just think of plucking the string with your left hand finger. It takes a little bit of experimentation to get it feeling just right, but maintain that 6/8 pulse and a very light grace note, graceful grace note. The other element which I wanted to look at here, which again elevates the challenge technically of this piece, is that of bass stopping. So bass stopping is used when we want to clean up the resonance of notes that ring over one another. So for example, if we have a chord that has an open A, and then we have a chord that follows that does not have an A in it at all, that means that A will be filtering across into that new chord. So, and it will really create a harmony that wasn't intended. So we want to stop that A from ringing. And it really makes a very big difference. Now in that example, I used a chord A minor, A, C, E. Then I went to the chord E minor, E, G, B. The second chord does not have an A in it anywhere, so it really sounds clashing. However, sometimes you can get away with it because the note does belong. So for example, at the beginning of this piece, we have an A in the bass, and then we go to a D minor harmony, which does have an A in it. So it's, if you left it ringing, it doesn't clash that much. And then the D, as we go into E7, also doesn't clash that much. So it's not the most essential of bass stopping examples. But I want to do it just to develop our skills because it's a relatively simple piece with the right and left hand, so I think we can include it in comfortably. So that would look like this. When you play the D, your thumb will jump to the A. And play this, I'm going from the beginning. Yeah, and then continue on. Teaching and bass stopping at the same time sometimes fries my brain. So the next one, we're going from D. We're doing the same thing. We're leaping from the E to stop the previous D ringing. Sometimes I've notated this for my own purposes like this, with an X, and then this one dash, 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 and then dash little X, and the X means stop that previous sound from ringing. Then the same thing would be for the E going to the A, and then here, when we have a rest, we want to really stop resonance altogether. So let me play the first couple of lines and just have a look at my thumb and have a listen to the control of the bass notes. Starting out with bass stopping, it can seem quite overwhelming because you're adding a whole new set of movements into the right hand. But over time, it does become more second nature. You don't have to think about it too much. There are also some techniques of rocking the thumb to adjacent strings, which we'll touch on in separate lessons on bass stopping. But in this piece, you can really just jump the thumb across to stop those strings from ringing. So go through the piece, identify anytime you're going to have one of those open strings ringing over into the next measure where it wasn't intended, and stop those bass notes from sounding. Now, the next element I wanted to talk about in terms of grade 3 techniques is that of guide fingers. So this section here, this B section, has a series of thirds going up and down, the third and second string and the first and second string descending. And we can make great use of guide fingers to keep the hand very stable. So from measure 20, watch first of all my third finger. Then watch my second finger. So we can get away with really a third finger guide finger, then the second. And it really does a great job of keeping the hand stable. Sometimes these guide fingers will be marked in on scores, sometimes not. When they are marked in, you're going to just see a little dash before the fingering, just a very subtle little dash, indicating not a gliss, not a portamento, but rather a guide finger, that the fact that the fingering is the same. Sometimes you will not have that at all. which is the case in this score, but you can sometimes just see if you take a moment, you're like, oh, that's 3, 3, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. All those fingers are staying down. That's why it can really pay dividends to sit down with a score away from the guitar when you're first learning it, just to look for things like this, opportunities to make your job easier. So let's have a listen to this whole section. And then if you were to stop all of the resonance here with these rests, you can simply lay your thumb across the strings or stop the strings up here with your left hand as well. Now what makes this passage so light and airy are these lovely thirds. And I want to just point out, this is more of a point of interest rather than anything that's crucial to the piece, but point out that thirds, when you invert them, they become sixths. So let's say we have C and E. That's a major third, C to E. Now if we flip that and we take the E as the bottom note and we put a C up the top, that is the interval of a sixth. So we've got a major third, a minor sixth. And lo and behold, that's exactly what we find here in measure 9. So here we get this section in C major, but we don't have root notes to the chords. They're all inversions. None of those harmonies are in root position. If they were in root position, it would sound more like this. Which sounds, well, a little more weighty and not as light and gracious, but also it establishes the key of C major a bit more heavily, whereas with these inversions, it's just a light visit to C major, then back to A minor. So that is the interval of a sixth. And then finally, in our theme of thirds and sixths, finally we have the interval of a tenth. So if we start with our C to E, that's a major third. We're going to leave the C this time and then put the E up an octave. That is a tenth. And that is exactly what we find here. There's that C and the E. We have a little string of them. So the combination of thirds, sixths, and tenths make this Siciliano really luscious and sweet sounding throughout. One final technique element that can elevate this piece, and is more of a grade 3 technique, is that in the A section, with these basses, the melody is so clear and important and taking the spotlight that we might want to actually use flesh tone on the thumb. So that's not using the nail, but rather the side of the thumb that only has the flesh. This gives a muted and very lush sound to the passage. Then, when we go to C major, we might use our nail to give a little bit of a brighter sound. And of course, when we get to the B section, which is marked poco forte, a bit of an unusual dynamic marking, meaning more or less mezzo forte, like a bit more loud, but not very loud, then we can use our nails again to give that contrast. So we can create a lovely contrast between the sections, not only with the material itself, which is contrasting, parallel major, the difference in rhythms. We can also use flesh tone in the thumb. So all of that adds to this piece. I think it adds to the challenge, but also the musical enjoyment. We've got the way we treat the Anacrusis. We've got the very graceful acciacchaturas, these grace notes. We've got a very exacting dotted rhythm in the A section. We've got the use of flesh tone in the A section to make it very introspective and graceful. And we've got guide fingers in that B section to help us play the thirds. And out of a point of interest, we've identified sixths and tenths that also appear throughout this piece. So all in all, a lovely piece, very accessible, but let's try and get some of these more advanced elements into the piece that will elevate your playing and also elevate the piece in your own performance.